This is Thomas Lanigan-Schmidt's show. Hello everyone, I'm Ted Reederer. I'm the director here at Howl Happening. On behalf of me, Sam, Corinne, Yoon, Catherine, and Jane Friedman, we'd like to welcome you all to tonight. This is a very special show for us. When I first applied to work here, I actually called Tommy and I said, will you do a show with us if I get this job? And he said he would. You remember that? Okay, so we have a special opening program that no one knows about, but not Tommy or anyone, but we've gathered together several of his students, of which I can so proudly say that I'm one of Tommy's students. Now, there are certain artists that educate us through their work. Then there are other artists, extra special artists, that are educators. Tommy is one of my favorite teachers in my 49 years on this planet. 48. And so, we have gathered some students to pay homage to Tommy's teaching. And I'm going to begin.
Oh, wow.
Oh shit.
Sam?
Oh my god.
Okay, so this is one of my paintings. Now, for those of you familiar with my work, it does not look like my work at all. I was at SVA, this would be 2005, going to graduate school, and I came into my studio, which was like a rabbit warren. You know how the studios are in grad programs, just walls thrown up. This is a painting I was working on for some friend of mine's daughters. And there was a little post-it note from Tommy that said, bring this to class. Now this was not my serious MFA, heavy-duty, conceptual, discursive, turning the New York art world on its ear artwork. This was a painting I was doing out of love for family friends. So I brought it to class, and Tommy held it up and said, if you can paint this kind of light and this kind of mood, then you're a good artist. Don't ever try to be what the art world wants you to be. This is the kind of art you should make. And I've taken that lesson with me up until this day. All of you probably who do know my artwork know that I take myself way too seriously. But I always have this voice, a little Tommy on my shoulder, kind of like the Charmin angels up there, saying, remember what making art is truly about. It's about doing a painting for friends' daughters. So now I would like to invite to the stage Diana Santiago, another one of Tommy's students.
Where to start, Tommy? My goodness. I'll tell you this, I'll start from the beginning. I remember applying to the MFA program and just doing a quick Google search, like, okay, who am I going to register with? Let's look at some art. Some twigs and strings, some people were making a few different things, and I saw your work. I had no idea. And I thought, ooh, yes, him. And I just read a little about you, he's from New York, and I had no idea what to expect. I sat in your class and I thought, oh, is this, this is what it's like to work with an artist, who's here to teach, and who's not just here to, make these big proclamations, and it was so tailored. I mean, I don't want to stand up here and just do this, like, love story to your class, but it changed everything. It really did, and it was so unique. Everybody knows, anybody who's had his class knows that it was very different than any other class that was taught at SVA. And the syllabus was open, and every week kind of informed the following week, and all of the students informed the rest of the students, and just it was so organic and so tailored to us that we were spoiled, to be totally honest, and you gave us so much time. Again, like Ted, of course, that we've had teachers and we've worked with people and we've learned inside and outside of an institution, but with you, you've made it so personal, and you really took time to make that connection, I think, with all of your students. I was the only Latina artist who was there. I was a single mom, and I was in SVA, and you were like, make work about this. Does your daughter's crazy fur coat? Paint that. Do this in highlighter. And I was kind of like, I like oil. And then I started trying to do different things, and I was really digging around and finding this like imagery, and you were like, don't worry about anything else, just make what you feel you want to put out in the world. So obviously, we're all here because of you, and to thank you so much, for giving us your precious time, really, really. I don't want to take up too much more time, but thank you, Tommy.
Hello, hello. My name is Pete Matrine, and I am also, Tommy was one of my thesis advisors, and I just want to take the opportunity to thank Tommy here and now, for how much he's meant over the years. Like, it's, as you go through the MFA experience, and for me personally, being a new artist at that time, the words that Tommy has given me, like, has resonated, to this present day, like everybody else has said. So I just really want to thank you. Like, I've been teaching now for almost 12 years, and I find myself going back to the way that you kind of approached us, being very open with your life. Now with my students, I try to do the same thing, and in doing that, all of a sudden now the younger generation starts to be open with their life. And so, I can't tell you enough how much we appreciate you. And, I wouldn't miss this opportunity. So thank you so much.
I feel very privileged to be here. I'm a little shy, so forgive me, but thank you so much. I remember you forever. And it was always so special to get critique from you and be in your classes. And your work is amazing, amazing. It's like a soul from another planet, but yet from here. And there are lots of things that I remember you told me, and one of them was like not to worry about archival materials. Just your energy and everything else, and all the materials that you were talking about. Like, you showed us a lot of films about of Jack Smith, and I remember that when I saw like the flaming creatures, it was something I've never seen before. Like the compositions and the chaos that was so perfect. It was so spiritual and godlike, and of course your work is like that as well. The spirituality and like this sort of tragedy and glamour and all these layers. And yeah, so those things really influenced me. So thank you so much.
St. Thomas. Thank you. My name is Dylan Mortimer. Up here? Okay. Dylan Mortimer. I make artwork like this with bronchial trees and such. I had a double lung transplant 2 years ago, and Tommy obviously very greatly influenced me in a number of ways. But what I want to speak to is after SVA, influenced greatly during SVA, but I went from SVA to pastor a church in Kansas City, like you do when you finish art school. Tommy was, is, and remains really one of the only people in my life that I could look to for guidance both theologically and artistically. And I've not been able to find anyone to have the breadth of experience, wisdom, and discernment to help me navigate challenges in both worlds. So I continue to look to him as an artist, as a person, and as a spiritual mentor. So words could never express my gratitude to you, Tommy. And thank you for being who you are and doing the work that you are and teaching me and guiding me in so many ways. Thank you.
That was amazing. Thank you. So we're about to start the panel. I just wanted to recount one last story because a lot of you are probably wondering what the syllabus was like for Tommy's class. Well, I'll give you an example. On the last day of class, this would be 2005, Tommy told us to meet him in Times Square. So we went to Times Square and we went into the McDonald's in Times Square where there was a diorama of New York. It was fairly large. It was probably like 3 or 4 of these vitrines combined, and there was, what you would expect, little miniature taxis and buildings and pedestrians and all this stuff. But there was also stranger things, like the World Trade Towers had been cut in half and repurposed as skyscrapers. Anonymous skyscrapers, but to everybody you knew they were the World Trade Towers. And there'd be a French fry that had hit a cab, someone had thrown a French fry, and the cab would be on its side. And a quarter would have taken out a pedestrian. And Tommy said to us, he goes, "This, children, is the best artwork in New York City right now." And it truly was. So I would now like to invite the panelists to come up. We have Pavel Zubak, who unfortunately has to cut out sort of quickly in the middle. You come up, Pavel. We have John Cernuda. We have Carlo McCormick. Trey, and of course, Thomas Lanigan-Schmidt. Everybody.
First of all, I just want to thank all the students for the nice things they said, and I'm just happy that I helped them a little bit because life can be very difficult at times, and making art is one of the things that gives us hope to keep going. What should I start with? I'm hoping someone will ask me a question, because that's actually when I do best.
Since Pavel has to leave, let's start with Pavel.
Okay.
In addition to your wonderful students, you taught all of us quite a lot too. So Pavel, I wanted to talk about how you met Tommy, how you encountered the work, what it's meant to represent this incredible artist for almost 20 years now.
Lucky me.
Yeah.
Well, I first met Tommy. Ooh. Hello. And I guess around 2000, somewhere in there. I had always been a fan. I used to see Tommy's shows at the Holly Solomon Gallery, and actually the first sort of full-time gallery I had that opened in 2001 was opened on 9/11, basically right after 9/11. And the first show was all about artists working with reflective materials, and it was called something like, All That Glitters, something along that line. And I remember the day after 9/11, meeting with Holly Solomon, and Tommy had been there all week, installing this beautiful altarpiece in the entrance to the exhibition, and it was just this it was such an interesting experience because, the big debate was whether to have the show or not have the show. And we had the show and lots of people came and there was no public transport and everybody walked and it was such an example of people. And I remember people just walking in and seeing this piece and being completely sort of overwhelmed and wanting to be together, and it really did, was art doing what art does. And I think the thing that has always made me so kind of not just engaged personally and aesthetically, just on every level with Tommy's work is that he goes to, I think I've written this someplace, he goes to all the places that we're not supposed to go to at polite dinner parties, you know? The work talks about sex, gay sex.
Not to count.
Oh, okay, sorry. I feel like I sound loud. You know, religion as opposed to spirituality, which is what people always say when they don't want to actually say religion, and class, moreover, because I think in many ways, you know, class is sort of the thing that we really never talk about in the art world, and so it's a very I mean, the work is, Tommy is really on the short list of artists who completely changed the way I think about art, the way I think about what the role of art is in life, and the idea of kind of devotional objects, and my understanding of what devotional objects are is so much broader and deeper because of my years of looking at his work and living with his work and showing his work. Sorry, I'm talking about you like you're not sitting right across from me, which is weird, but I feel like I'm addressing Anyway, but we've done many shows together, and I mean, one of the great pleasures about this show is that we have this glorious catalog. When we had this also marvelous exhibition retrospective at MoMA PS1, it came on the calendar rather quickly, and so we weren't able to have a publication to sort of mark that event. And that had really always been a dream of mine. You know, Tommy, as many of you know, has had an unbelievable and long career and has shown internationally and been honored in so many different ways, both as an artist, as an activist. But this catalog that we hold in our hands tonight is really long overdue. And so really thank you so much to Ted and Jane and everyone here, you know, for making that happen. Also, I just want to say one quick thank you also to my rock, Chris Nuzzi here, who, without whom nothing happens.
Tommy was incredibly supportive that we've all addressed, who we are very happy that our long-term director is here to join us. Can you talk about meeting Tommy and producing some incredible shows that sadly some of us here never got to see, but you have a long relationship with the beloved man?
Yes, I do. Well, I think we should talk about the first retrospective that we worked on together, you know, at Holly's, yeah. Which Holly was a little like, why should we be doing retrospectives, you know? And it's like to get the idea out there of like what all the artists of her gallery were doing, and you know, the 80s was like the golden age of American art. And since the 80s to the present, you know, not much is happening, or the spirit of art. And like Holly was like one of the, like all the galleries at that time were like they were like their own like fortresses or castles, we could say. You know, with their collection of artists and what they were showing, and how diverse everything was, and you know, it was like a really exciting time, you know. And I think this show right now represents that, and it captures that feeling, or for me it does, you know.
Well, what year did you come to New York?
79.
79. Because Holly...
And you had one of the first shows up at that time. You were in a group show. The icon thing was up with the group.
The thing that's in Germany.
I'm trying to think of her name. With the huts, there was one of the
Huts?
Well, no, they were the house.
Donna Dennis.
Donna Dennis had a house. Your piece was in the corner there, and it was like very special lighting. Like the gallery was like sort of dark but highlighted. All these Judy Pfaff, I think, had a piece there, and when you walked in there, it was like, wow, what is this? I mean, it was like really amazing, like. You know, and Holly's gallery was always that way back in the.
But I always put Holly's gallery at a higher level than most of the 80s places. She had a vision that like went further and deeper than most 80s art. Because I don't think of her as an 80s gallery. I just think of her as a gallery.
No, totally. Because when I went to the first Venice Biennale back in the early 80s, you were there. Judy Pfaff had an installation there. There were a lot of Holly's artists. Donna Dennis was there. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah, Holly was always Holly was always more popular in
Robert Kushner.
in Europe.
Robert Kushner was in that show. And it was interesting because actually this is the reason why I'm saying that this was the golden age of American art, because you had Holly's artists there, you had Anina's artists there with Basquiat and Barbara Kruger, and then you had Mary Boone's artists there with David Sally and Schnabel, and it was like amazing because you walked around the Venice Biennale and you saw the German artists, the Italian artists, you know, which were all great, you know, like it was like, you know, I mean, it was like amazing. You know, and
It was a good tribe all around. We all liked each other.
That's when you were at Anina Nossi, right?
I was at Anina right after that.
Oh,
because I was still in school. Don't make me too old.
Carlo, our last panelist here, critic and curator, and king of the downtown scene. You must have seen some incredible installations of Tommy's at Holly's.
Yeah, I sure did. Holly was a huge influence on me. I kind of always thought of her, I mean, I was pretty tight with my mom. I wasn't like doing surrogate stuff, but I always thought of her as like my second mom. But of course I knew her kids, so it was like one of those like careful what you wish for things. I mean, I think, you know, I don't know if I know your work or your story almost before you, because I do think of New York as this beautiful narrative that goes on through generations, and you've been this kind of beautiful voice to me, like way more mysterious and way more benign than like a Jack Smith voice, which over-dominates like a shrill kind of sound of megalomania. You were just always this beautiful thing, and then like, I mean, I don't know about you guys, I was practically crying when your students are doing these little tributes. It's like, it was like, oh, it was so beautiful. And so I always felt like, and then, you know, so I only really kind of finally hooked up with you to work on this catalog thing, and I couldn't help but think that because for years, like I would always like Holly would be going up there, or someone I knew would be going to your studio, and everyone would be talking about like a pilgrimage to Mecca, but I never quite understood what it was about. So I thought I was going to be entering into some palatial wonderland, but instead it was like this incredible place where the hoarders turned into an alchemist or something like that. And like I realized that that's why people have spoken, you know, and look this sitting in the front row. I mean, you got like, it's this beautiful history of New York that can only exist as long as people are willing to kind of share experience and stories, and you've been really vital for so long that way. I don't know what the question was, but I guess
No, it's a great segue too. I mean, that's a huge component of Tommy's work, are these amazing narratives, and we're currently surrounded by piece that was very influential to me personally and professionally, Mysteria Tremendum here, which is a semi-autobiographical work about your salvation through art and the way you were raised and the time and context in which you were raised. Can you talk about your early years, Tommy, and what brought you to New York?
What brought me to New York was my father wanted me to be on a ditch digging crew. After I went to Pratt for a year, and things didn't work out. There was no more money to go back. So my father decided he was going to, I think he was going to make a man out of me. So I was hooked up onto a ditch digging crew that my brother had been on the year before. It was kind of like continuation of like the New Deal kind of thing. And on this ditch digging crew were like all the kids that wanted to murder me in high school. So the day I was supposed to go to start digging ditches, I saw them sitting there, and I just left and went to New York. Now, when I think back, that was really a wildly crazy thing to do, because I actually had no money, nothing in my pockets at all, and somehow, like, I didn't die, and things worked out. But I always remember that day, and I saw, the heat squiggles lining up, visually rising up from the street. My mind just went blank, and I knew I had to come to New York. And so I met a bunch of other gay runaways that I hung around with initially, and it was a vibrantly creative bunch. I mean, everyone was broke, really broke, no money. And they made art from whatever they had. And through that world, I was able to meet Charles Ludlam, Jack Smith, Henry Geldzahler. It was a very rich world. So that when I first came into like the contemporary art world, after being around the street world and Jack Smith and all that for like 6 or 7 years, the art world was like stepping back into some kind of stifling, horrible place. It really was suffocating, like being back in the 1950s. So like when you look at the stuff around here that you see, this is stuff that when it was done, when I first made it, most people didn't take it that seriously. People even told me I was nuts and stuff like that. And the first person to take anything I did seriously was John Rawls at the Village Voice, who wrote about my art in like 1968. And I was totally surprised that he would just write about someone that no one knew about. And so that kind of like gave me the, whatever it is, the inspiration, courage, whatever the word would be, to just keep going from there. And I like to think that, like, most of my friends, if you look at the picture of the Stonewall, when I was in that riot, everyone else in that picture is dead. And they all died before they were like 25 years old. They didn't even live to like the 80s when everyone was dying of AIDS. So there's all this death. But like the affirmative beauty of life always sparkled up through all those people. And that's a major influence in my art. And when I met like Henry Geldzahler, who was the curator of the Met back there. He was the curator of contemporary American art. I like to think that the reason I survived, and this is going to sound crazy, was because I didn't rob anything from him. Because that might sound strange to you, but a lot of people I knew that the streets were thieves. They stole because they didn't have any money. I didn't have any money either, but I was lucky to be from a family that like gave me like a kind of tenacity and self-respect not to rob people whose houses I was at. I know that must sound really strange to people here to hear someone saying that, because I bet most of you don't go to people's houses and think about robbing.
You do look in the medicine chest.
Well, speaking of the medicine chest, yes, there was a street queen I knew named Sister Tui, who, like Agosto knows Sister Tui, who was also Opera Jean. Now, this was a very complex person, but one of the things Sister Tui would do was the moment he would go into anyone's house, the first thing was to go to the bathroom and look through the medicine chest to see if there were any Tylenols to steal. Because there used to be a sleeping pill called Tylenols that I don't think people can even get it prescribed anymore because it was so deadly. But imagine that, among street queens, I mean, someone actually had their name based on Tylenols. That's the kind of world that was. Sister Chewy, so that. And what's funny is there was a movie about the Stonewall by Roland Emmerich that I don't know why he changed that name to Queen Chewy. He had all these people to work with, and Sister Chewy sounds better than Queen Chewy. I mean, the original street name is usually pretty good art.
I just want to also point something out for those of you who don't know. Because one of the things that you did, which I think is really important with regard to Stonewall and the history of Stonewall, besides just being, a really sort of eloquent and important voice in so much of the new sort of scholarship that gets written, the films that get made, but also one of the things that for me always stuck with me was that in David Carter's book on Stonewall, that you were able to identify some of these faces, some of these kids that were street kids that had their pictures in every history book, and yet they just sort of were there as kind of stand-in, kind of generic gay people, and so you gave them their identities. And gave them to the public, which I think is just a profound thing.
The photographer, over the years was more interested in finding out their names, and we had a correspondence going back and forth. Because there's a tradition that I think is pretty awful in journalistic photographs, that they tend to make people into generic whatevers. So like the people in the Stonewall picture were considered just generic facts, with no names by most people. So like the very fact that most of them now have names, because I knew them personally, it means a lot to me. And when I look at them, if you look at the Stonewall picture, there's like one queen that has a purse there. And what I like about the purse, it's a cute little diminutive, adorable little purse, but it's a little hard to figure out what's in it. There was a brick in it. So the brick was part of like, this person that had the brick, that was someone named Drag Queen Chris. So I never saw him drag, it was always called Drag Queen Chris. But I knew that the brick was not used like recklessly. That was used for self-defense, because back then you could get murdered easy for being gay, especially in the street. There'd be people that would jump out of cars with baseball bats and just beat people up or kill them. It was always fun getting fished out of the river dead. I could go on and on for hours about that. But that world is a valuable resource, because like everyone in that world was very creative, but most of them never got a chance to like bloom into artists. Well, you're one of the luckier ones that I'm still alive and still making art.
It's really humbling to me to, yes, bravo you, to read the interview that is in this wonderful catalog when you talk about coming to New York and what it meant to be gay and out at the time, and obviously Pavel and John have had a different experience, and for me it's been quite easy to live my life. But you say on this ditch digging crew that these were the people that would kill you. You say it like it's a joke, but it isn't, and it's hard to reconcile that. But there's a silver lining that was interesting in this book that alludes to Pavel's point about the nature of class in your work, but when homosexuality was patently illegal, it allowed for more confluence of people of different classes, because spaces where gay people could congregate were so limited and underground, and it actually did open some interesting doors for you in your personal and professional life as an artist.
Oh, totally, because their life back then was a very small world. And it really was centered around the street and the Stonewall Inn. People went to the Stonewall Inn because it was the only place to go, where everyone could dance. So that would mean that like a curator from the Morgan Library would be there along with a bunch of like down and out street kids. It was an amazing place. It had a really good jukebox, and that all of these people came together there. And it's funny because when people talk about the Stonewall, a whole bunch of people like to say, oh, it's just a mafia dump, I hate that place. No, actually it was run by the mafia, but it was the only place we had to go, and it was good. They had a really good jukebox. It was all Motown music, and it was okay. When I went there, started going there, I was only 2 years out of high school, and it was the exact same music that I danced to at Catholic Youth Organization, CYO. So to me, the Stonewall was always like the CYO. It was to me just a clear connection from Catholic Youth Organization to like Stonewall. No separation. I mean, it's funny that I say that with no irony or anything. It's just like, it was CYO.
And it's really interesting for you to draw those parallels that I think elude the majority of your audience. It seems the art world knows very little about the religious world and vice versa, and you're able to
just a word, those CYO, these organizations like, the YMCA, CYO, it has a certain craziness and like its officialness, and at the same time it's like trying to be like, like the adults might say, nice for the kids. And it was.
There also seemingly is a deliberate obtuseness to the language that both communities employ. You talk in this interview with Jonathan about Henry Geldzahler introducing you to art form, and you being so amused by the preposterousness of the words that were published in this magazine that Carlo was written for.
But I was a speed freak. It was different. I wasn't intellectual.
But I was actually lucky because going to Catholic school, we were taught a very crazy language usage. Like we were told, we never called the bathroom in school. We always called it the lavatory. So the nuns were always trying to like knock the immigrant out of us and make us into like mainstream Americans. And at the same time, we were being taught these crazy word usages. So when I first was around the art world, it was like crazy word usages, like art form. It was crazy, but it made sense because it was just another specialized crazy thing like theology or something. And that's actually one of the things I like about the art world, is that it has this crazy language. And if you can use the word signifier when you're talking to art world people, you gain a lot of ground quick. If you can say everything that means what the word signifier means, and you don't use the word signifier, people glaze over. The moment you use those words that are like, I don't know what the key words, whatever you want to call them.
I think they're called signifiers.
It opens doors.
And when your work veers into sort of a more Catholic lexicon, which it does frequently, I find myself needing to break out a thesaurus. Can you talk about the preposterousness of religious language as well? And why it's so impenetrable?
Well, it's like, okay, when you hear, okay, it's just like, okay, when people talk about the Immaculate Conception, I bet most of you don't know what the Immaculate Conception really is. You probably think it's the virgin birth. The Immaculate Conception actually means the Virgin Mary was born without stain of original sin. Now, if you can penetrate that at all, this means she was a baby, having none of the effects of original sin. Now I'm going to really go a little nuts here. If you think it's true, in Catholic thing, it means she couldn't get a cold because she wasn't subject to the fallen nature of humanity. In other words, she had none of the flaws that other people have, and that's why God would want her to be the mother of his son. But it doesn't mean that she didn't have sex. She didn't have sex, I mean, whatever. It's all these strange, but I love those word usages, like when the Virgin Mary is taken up into heaven, that's called the Assumption. Now, when you hear the word, the Feast of the Assumption, when someone isn't Catholic, they think, what does that mean? What's someone making assumptions about? But like, if you're Catholic, you know that it means the Virgin Mary being taken up into heaven. Or we're like transubstantiation. It means like something, like it means like if you're looking at a chair with someone sexy sitting on it, and you say, I wish I could be that chair. You're saying that you wish you could be transubstantiated into that chair. I mean, you could have yourself partaking in what the chair is, and at the same time have the chairness still be there. That's pretty wild word usage. That's used in reference to like communion. Like the bread is Christ's body and blood, even though it looks like bread still, it's transubstantiated. So see, all these words naturally segue into the art world. It's just like, because the art world is a faith-based community. For real, yes.
For those of us who don't believe in God, that's exactly, we believe in art.
Yeah.
And there, people refer to you as an alchemist pretty consistently, and there's some parallel there with your, with transubstantiation, as it were. You seem to take these things that are commonly available and whip them and spin them into precious gems for us all. And can you talk about your material palette, how you came to it, how consistent it stayed?
Well, my material actually really does come mostly through Catholic school. Because okay, I went to Catholic school, I mean, there's probably some Catholics here, and so you know what Vatican II is. Vatican II is a council that changed the Catholic Church and modernized it, kind of. Okay, but I was raised when the Mass was still in Latin, and things were very beautiful and decorative. It was very visual. But it was very visual in a way that was not about expensive things. And I went to like a working class church. So like when we would have like the bishop would come over, he would like anoint people with these little wads of cotton. They were thrown into a waste paper basket by a priest holding it, but the waste paper basket was covered with gold foil, so that it had a special kind of look. Everything was like framed in this way that like it had a special celebratory quality to it. So we would have like little shrines and things that were made in school that had flowers made out of tissue paper, like pretty pink tissue paper. And I remember first seeing that when I was like 6 years old. I was very moved by that. But the thing that moved me the most, and this has had a huge influence on me, was when the bishop came to church. The bishop wears a big hat called a mitre. It's kind of shaped like a giant fingernail. You've probably seen it in art history books and things. Okay, so we come to the church and it's sparkling. There's little diamonds sparkling on it and everything. And I say, wow, that's amazing. And I was one of the altar boys, so I was the one that after he took it off his head, I would hold it so it got past me. I would hold the mitre. It was not very. And it was covered with fake plastic jewels. And to me, that was like, some people look at that and say, oh, they're so cheap. No, to me, it was just glorious that like, he could walk into that place and everything would be like pizzazz. I mean, he was all like clamored up and sparkling, like if you know your art history, like Abbot Sujet, and the sparkle of everything is what brings you closer to heaven. But seeing this made out of like basic throwaway materials, I was just a little kid when I saw that. It was like to see this taken seriously by all these grown-ups was like a huge thing. And so that had a huge influence on my materials and my art. And then when I came to New York, it's like drag queens and street queens had the same aesthetic. Okay, they would do a thing, you've probably all seen the movie Gone with the Wind. When Scarlett O'Hara makes the dress out of the drapes, she takes the drapes down from the window and then somehow makes it into this beautiful green velvet dress. Well, street queens used to stay at SROs, or the single room occupancy hotels, and they would take the drapes down, and a lot of times the drapes had a lining, and they would cut off the seam and just slip in between the lining and say like the damask or whatever it was, and like put a few pins in it and make it like a Diana Ross gown. and make it look pretty good, because like, they knew how to do it. It's just these other kids that I knew the stuff that like great fashion designers or just regular fashion designers. When you see a fashion shoot in the street, if you go behind the model, you're going to see all kinds of pieces of tape and all things like holding the folds in place. Well, the street queens would do that with safety pins and stuff. They would get the same effect as like a great fashion model's clothes. And then combine that with like that Jack Smith was always like taking people from the street and just making them just having them be themselves and have that be great art. So I was surrounded by that, and that just added on to like the stuff from Catholic school. So it was more affirmation. So again, when I got to the art world stuff, because I was around like not art world people for a while, I was shocked at how backward the art world was. And I really thought it was back in the 1950s. I thought, what is wrong with these people? But the crazy thing also, what was wrong was that they had a lot of power too, so if I was interviewed for something, I would write and talk about the street or something like that, and the street queen was always edited out of the article that was being written. So that was like really not, it was really nasty to have that happen. So like now that I'm 70 years old, a lot of the loose ends are being pulled together, and that makes me happy that like those early years are getting some acknowledgement, just having some worth in the art.
Yeah, I'm curious, your work certainly speaks to the moments in which it was made, but it also actually has a lot to tell us about the current moment and the atrocities that we live with daily. And, we're approaching an important anniversary of the Stonewall riots, which seem to, be marked every 5 years, and you are consistently a part of those, and you're being solicited, along with Pavel and Chris, to lend work to exhibitions. Can you talk about the sort of specifically in the art world context about the ways in which you feel the work of the gay liberation movement is presented to the public now?
Oh, well, now it's presented. I mean, it didn't used to be presented at all. It only started, gay art, any kind of gay art, kind of started to be, in the art world, the first acknowledgement. I mean, there's always people like Paul Cadmus that, if you looked, you always knew about. And the art world started to, like, publicly talk about gay art with like Robert Mapplethorpe and a few other people.
Warhol before you.
No, Warhol was a closet case.
No, Warhol was
Warhol
pretty squishy compared to Rauschenberg. And
Warhol only appeals to straight people who want to say he's Warhol when he was gay. Warhol was not nice to gay people. Warhol was a closet case. And back then. And Warhol would always say he was asexual. Anytime you would talk to art students or anyone back in the 60s, they would say, Andy Warhol is asexual. And it was always said in this way, like, so there, I told you. And Andy Warhol would, but behind the scenes people talk, but Andy Warhol would never make a public stance on that.
you don't think he was like way more kind of queer than queered up that whole closet thing of Rauschenberg and John?
They were all closet cases, all three of them. I think they're great artists, but I do think they're closet cases too. I mean, they were. I mean, they never wanted to rock the boat about that. And then they would be drunk at parties and have sex with everyone in the closet. So, literally in the closet. I know people that would come out of like some closeted area and say, oh, who's in there doing this or that, and they'd say, blah, 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 whatever. And then a lot of other artists that were not even closet cases, that were just straight people. That people thought were straight people were doing gay things in secret closets and stuff. No, it's like, okay, but I think the Warhol generation is like almost as old as my parents. And so like, when I came to New York, that was like, sure, people, if someone went to the factory, they felt good because they were there. But, and everyone there was like, gay, but it was not part of the street world at all. It like had a connection there, but it was kind of hit and miss. And okay, Henry Geldzahler was very But Andy Warhol was, you had to kind of know the scoop. And like someone would say, like, oh, I had sex with Andy Warhol. And that's how you knew, but Andy Warhol would never take a stand.
For him, a lot of it was his religion. So how did you negotiate believing in the kind of ship that the church puts out, at the same time knowing that like you're kind of a sinner doomed to hell by the orthodoxy of the religion?
I just never saw it that way. I always liked the nice stuff about it, like the other stuff, it's like, so what? I don't care about the other stuff. I mean, it doesn't bother me. If the church doesn't, if the bishop or priest doesn't like me, I mean, they never come out and say that, because, I mean, if someone would excommunicate me, I could get like mileage out of that, I think.
Work it.
That's never happened, right? I'm not on their sites or anything.
You mentioned in an interview with Jonathan that Henry's partner, Chris, was kind of at the vanguard of repositioning the word queer.
Oh yeah, that was, okay, Chris Scott, I met him back in 1967, think of it, so long time ago. He was the first person I heard use the word queer in a positive way. I mean, because like, okay, when I was growing up, if someone called you a queer, it wasn't meant in a good way. It was meant as a solid, ugly put down. And so I was talking about that with Chris Scott one day, and he just said, no, that's actually a compliment if you twist the word around in a good way, and you think it means you're like unusually interesting in a queer way. And so Charles Ludlam and Chris Scott and John Vaccaro and a bunch of other people, and Jack Smith, we're all like redefining, first thing to redefine just the way people acted by like, say like Jack Smith's movie, Flying Creatures. And then the words would come in. But Chris was the first one I ever heard in like 1967 using the word queer more like the way it's used today. And what's interesting is like a lot of word usages that are like a big part of like, say like college classes and things like that, actually come up from the street. And the street is not given credit for that. Like I was at Columbia University a few years ago, and the students were very proud because they were using gender switch terms, using called like a man, she, or a woman, he, and which is nice, but like they thought they invented that. No. That comes from the street, and that goes way back. I mean, if you read like Tchaikovsky's biography or something like that, he would get together with his friends and they talk nonstop, kind of like gay street talk with each other. So like it's probably goes all the way back to the cave queens. It was not invented by academia.
Exactly. It's also odd to me to talk about this like way back time because I was in elementary school and like fucking Will and Grace was on television and came to New York after Sex and the City, and I cannot imagine the New York that your work is about and that you speak about. But you both, oddly, seemingly biographically, might have rode this wave of the normalization of queer life, and Tommy obviously is pioneering an aesthetic tradition. Could you guys talk about the change in the status and the concretization of a sort of queer aesthetic?
I'd like to say something first because I like to be corrected.
You're heterosexual.
Yes, I am. But I'm queer as anyone in the room. But by my history, I only share it so that like Agosto might like correct me or something like that. I really felt that like in the East Village is where we made a really kind of a big shift away from that. When I was a kid, I really felt like I saw the rise of it. We had a group here called like FAFH, Facts Against Facial Hair. And like, Karen was involved and they did this big mural like, right at the kind of the gates of the East Village, right by St. Mark's and, Astor Place kind of inaugural, which was like Clones Go Home. And I really felt that queer, and then of course, go back to Jack Smith and all this stuff like that.
I don't think most people out there know what you mean by
A
clone.
clone, I think everyone knows what a clone is, right? So this is like it's the idea that identity could, be homogenized and what looked like, Freddie Mercury or something. I don't know. It had a specific meaning back then, like mustache gays in piano bars with ferns, and this thing. And I really thought that the East Village, by having least experienced punk, kind of it got empowered kind of queer culture. Is that a fair thing to say? Did you feel that when were you on 4th Street? What were those years?
I was on 4th Street from October '66 to 73. So it's way before.
Right, it's way before that. But do you feel that the East Village was somehow, because of the street, because of things from more on the street, whatever, that somehow it created a more aggressive, less conformist version of gay identity over the years?
It's hard to say because, you're speaking as an individual, and I would always say there were always individuals that were very nice and accepting people, but in general, most people weren't. And the 70s, you're talking about the 80s?
Well, that's kind of when it really hits my consciousness, that we were doing something different. Instead of people trying to impersonate Judy Garland, they were going to channel Nina Hagen or something like that. And then things got.
But I see when I hear that, I have no problem with older women, but I always hated Judy Garland. I never liked any of that going way back. When there's these queens that said the stone will happen because Judy Garland died, no, it didn't. It's like I never got along with Judy Garland, and when we're both talking about personal experience, and I'm not trying to invalidate it.
No. I like to be corrected. That's the only reason I brought it up. I would have thought I'd run it by you, Tommy. But you go. Tell us about the transformations by what you saw in these years.
Well, there's so much.
Yeah.
So where to start?
I know.
Starting Hazelton.
But actually, I want you to talk about your work in a way. People need to. Just one example, for instance. The piece over there,
Which piece over there?
The tower, the tents, and the Titanic.
Yeah, these are patterns.
Yeah. I think we should talk about that piece in particular because it has a great story.
Well, that's what I'm hoping.
But I think that people need to get a little tiny tidbit in order to really look at the work and get more involved in it, because there's so much detail and so much history.
Right. But the way that I like to deal with that is that people look at the stuff and then you ask a question about something like you're doing, and that's that way I enter into it through whatever you're seeing. That's what's most important to me, because I want my art, it's deliberately made to be mostly user-friendly. It's not I hope it's not intimidating in any way. I don't want it to be intimidating. I want it to be very friendly to look at, and then there's other things in there that are tougher things that may come as you look at it.
But unfortunately today's art, there's not much to really get involved in and really look at. You just look at it and just move on. So I think, but your work is very different, and I think if you just use that as an example and talk about.
Yeah, but actually, I have to ask you a specific question about it. There's a million ways I can talk about that, but
the imagery that's in that, and
that piece is about the Titanic.
Right.
And so when you go up to it, you look at it, and it's all done in black and white. because it's supposed to be something like ice going on there. Now, if you don't get that, that's fine with me. If you just enjoy the feeling of looking at it, that's okay. Because that to me is like someone looking at like a drag queen or like a well-vested bishop or something and admiring just the glory of the way they look, that's fine. But if you look deeper into it, or further, maybe deeper is the wrong word, then there's like little references there to Titanic, and then hopefully you go with that. So that's but without a lead, I can't connect anything. So if someone wants to ask a question.
Well, tell me, let me try it a little differently. Because actually, I would a little disagree with you, John, because I still find that, because I have the privilege of talking to artists my whole life, and I still think that most, even young artists now, you talk to them about their work, it has incredible mental layers. There's a lot going on, and sometimes you just got to talk to them to get it, and Tommy's work unfolds that way. But the thing, okay, so when I finally got I got to really talk to you, it was such a thrill. But it was like, I was so happy because Abbé Sujet was in my mind, right? And you were like, oh yes, but he's Benedictine as well, and he's put it into a whole theological thing for me, but I always liked him for the kind of permission he gave us for a kind of something more celebratory instead of like self-flagellatory that the ecstatic experience could allow. But then I tried to talk to you about materials, and I failed. I failed to connect with you on that because I was thinking of like Kurt Schwitters would always talk about like how, you know, because he's the first person I know historically really who worked with these abject materials. You know, all these things, and he would be like, but I would see these broken buttons and like all, you know, and torn, ticket stubs and whatever. And I thought they had a story to tell and they could cry to me more deeply. And then you don't feel that at all because you're so transformative about the nature of these things that somehow if it's a piece of cellophane wrapper that just has a really great sparkle or like some tawdry bit of tinfoil or whatever, you're never thinking of its kind of impoverished qualities. It's totally like just, does that make sense? So I want to explain that.
Yeah, okay, I'm glad you said that because like, I don't look at, like say like a piece of saran wrap. You're all familiar with saran wrap sometimes. Cling wrap is another brand. Okay, when I was a kid, my father, we always used wax paper. And like when I would ask why we don't get saran wrap, my father said to me, that's too expensive. Okay, so I think you're grasping what I'm saying here. So to me, saran wrap was like, that's a very high-class material. So when I was an older boy, okay, I was around when I was like first, like starting to feel sexual desire. I was with another altar boy that was pretty much the same age, except his voice was already getting deep. And we were talking in the sacristy, that's the room next to the altar where you change into your altar boy outfit. And he was eating a pepper and egg sandwich, because he was Italian, that was wrapped in saran wrap. And then he threw it in the garbage can, and it was mixed in the garbage can with the gold foil that was used for the potted plants in the church. And we took the saran wrap out of the garbage can, and with the gold foil, we crunched the saran wrap into little pearls. It was me and him working together. And like, as I think back, he was so sexy that I wanted to be with him, but I wouldn't have said that back then. I wouldn't have even thought. I would have thought that without thinking that. You know what I'm saying? Like when you're very young and you see someone sexy and you're just starting to become aware of sexy and things like that, you don't totally grasp it. So I was just happy to be with him and be with him, taking these like things out of the garbage can and making them into something beautiful. And he had like very big, tough hands, and like, so I just loved seeing his hands mold these little bunches of saran wrap into these pearls. And like, so I'm pretty sure you grasp the layers of going on there of like sexual desire and putting something together that is about a beautiful combination of two people working together on something, and like no sex is going to happen, but there's some kind of dance that symbolizes sex that goes on. I mean, I honestly believe that we're much more in touch with our like animality as a high human thing going on in us than we believe we are, and that's where art comes from. It comes from like those, think of it. I mean, you ever watch those shows on TV? Not on TV, they're online, they're not on TV mostly. The ones where like, it's like they have a safari that like in Africa where there's like, it's today, and there's like lions going out and killing deers and eating them and all kinds of stuff. That's pretty gruesome. But you look at that and you think most of these animals, the elephants and everything, spend all their day looking for food and finding food, looking for food and having sex, looking for food and having sex and taking care of their babies. At what point, think about it, did someone look at someone drawing something on a wall of a cave and say, this person is not going to have to be the person that goes out and has to hunt. We're going to bring the food home to this person so they can have the time to draw these pictures on the wall of the cave. That's when art happens. I really don't believe that those artists had to go out and hunt with the other people once people knew they could represent things on those walls. And that's because art is a huge concentration of energy and transformation of life into some kind of symbol that you desperately need. When it's really good, you desperately need it. And it comes up from the human hunt for like our being coming, but it starts with food, and then it becomes food for the soul. Because again, go back to those animal shows online, and like what separates people from those animals is that people do things like make art, make sweaters. I mean, other animals, like people, like there'll always be like someone will say something. Oh, but what about those animals that make those huge dirt piles? I think, oh, that's nice. They make like ants or something. That's nice. They have a clean ant inside. They make a dirt pile, and they're all working themselves to death and feeding the babies until they grow up and work themselves to death. I mean, but like, there's got to be more about being a person. So like back to like what you were saying, it's like when I saw like the guy's name, the original guy's name was Eddie, the one with the pepper and egg sandwich and the saran wrap. I just knew I had to spend time with him putting that saran wrap into something that would impress him. That was me fighting for my life and my dignity, and somehow we were dancing with it, both of us. So that art is about a kind of dance that people need. It's a ritual, and it's a ritual about like another kind of food. And you know, in the academic world, I take each person as an individual. Okay, if I sense there's another teacher that is like a really frozen academic, I generally avoid conversations with them. And then the people that are more open, I will talk to more, because like people that are kind of frozen in academia in a bad way can be terrifyingly petty, and in what they don't want to penetrate, they're like what they think is their security or something. So you have to be very careful around them.
Can I tell a real quick joke? So I grew up with college professor parents, academics, and the joke in our house was, why are academics so petty?
Why?
Because the stakes are so low.
Oh.
That's what I grew up with, just to let you know.
Well, that gives
kind of true.
And I think there's a lot to think about. But because in academia, the stakes are low compared to actually making art. I mean, because academia can always tell itself it's making art. because it has all the verbal delineations to justify it. But that's why it's academia. Because it's all about this safe framing of things and then catching up later. And so surviving around academics is a dance. Yes?
Tommy, when you were showing at a Holly Solomon, that kind of gallery in that particular Soho location, your art is very different from most of the things that you were showing. And what was your relation with Holly, and why do you think she fell in love with your work?
Holly first saw my art. This goes back to like hunting and bodily needs. Holly first saw my art because she had to have a bowel movement. Holly had gone to another, when I first showed my art in my apartment, I would give it away. But Holly went to an artist's loft, and I had given that artist like a bag of chalices and rats. This is back in like the early 70s. And when she came over, they threw my art in their bathroom just to get it out of the way. And at a certain point, Holly said, "Can I use your bathroom?" And so she went in there, and then she saw this stuff on the floor that was my chalices and rats, and so she asked the artist if she could call me. Now, I was very wary at first, because like I had known art world people through Henry Geldzahler and Chris Scott, and like I actually didn't want to meet her. She didn't have a gallery yet. This is like in 1971, 72, something like that. And but I agreed to let her come around, and she agreed not to wear a big fur coat with lots of jewelry, because I was living on 4th Street between B and C in a half burned down building. That was really a place where people get murdered, and any time of the day you could get murdered there. And she came to visit, and like we became kind of friends. But she didn't like me to mention anything gay in the art ever. She was totally like, she wouldn't say, "Don't do that." She would just go like icy blank. And this is someone that could be like, everyone would think was like a totally open-minded, happy person, but she was in many ways, but she wasn't when it came to gay things. She didn't loosen up about gay things until the 1990s. So getting along with her was like fine as long as like, I don't know, as long as, because like, okay, John, when there was the show there was some of the early works were in the show. But
It's all the way over here.
What?
It's way on the other side of the room.
Okay, I'm back.
Okay, good. Okay, some of the works are in that caseway in the corner there. The stuff I made when I was a teenager were in that show. Yeah. But remember, they were in a glass case, shoved
It was the first thing that you saw, actually.
But you had to really look.
But it was on the left-hand side, so you don't really look at it first because you go into the space.
Well, you saw the case it was in. Yeah. But they were blocked by other things in front of them. So
right,
it was like, and it was deliberately shown that way.
Yeah.
So by then, because that was in the early 90s, was that? Or that
late 90s.
Late 90s?
Yeah.
By then, she wasn't going to say no to like the early days.
Well, also, I wanted to bring this up because she was getting all that attention from Robert Mapplethorpe, and she had to go to DC to say that Mapplethorpe's work is real and that it's very art and it's not pornographic, of the pornographic porno.
But she used to think it was pornographic when she didn't want to show it.
No, she didn't.
Yeah.
And there's the big thing about that because it was shown at
Corcoran. You're talking about the Corcoran show, and I think actually that changed a lot of people because censorship will do that. And I think when all of a sudden that happened, people who were not even comfortable with the subject matter or with the sexual politics of that work, all of a sudden they say, "No, this is art." But I think, I know Holly from well before the 90s, and I've always thought of her as incredibly, like, at least gay friendly.
No, I don't,
No, I mean,
I think, no, see, it's interesting, it's like, okay.
I mean, Ezar owns that work. She was supporting Ezar all those years. I mean, I always thought that Holly showed like people like Judy Pfaff who were really butch, and then all these other male artists who were like not.
That doesn't mean a person is gay friendly. That just means they're showing gay artists that are making art. I mean, it's like, you know, I mean, a gay person knows if you're talking about something gay, like you just say someone's good looking and someone ices cold in front of you, like don't go there. You know what they're like. I mean,
I know the inside story about this, and it's true of what Tommy's saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she could be like bubbly and happy and all this stuff, but at the same time, she would say that she thought that gay people, until the 90s. In the 90s, she started to change.
Well, because of that attention.
Maybe that was it.
Yeah, it was.
By then,
no, I know so. I mean, I know as a fact.
She wouldn't, because she used to say things like, she thought like gay people were like, she'd say it's like being a heroin addict or an alcoholic or something. And I mean, that's not a nice thing to say.
She did say these things.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she would say there was this impunity, like you were just supposed to admit your faults. And then I'd be at a party and there'd be two gay people talking about just something gay that wasn't like hot sex or anything, just about like, well, their boyfriend came home or something like that. And she would say something like, oh, perversion, I love perversion. But perversion, I mean, no, so I you know, she's an interesting person, but she's like one of these complex people like Ivan the Terrible, that you kind of like figure out how to deal with.
I have a question about.
Okay.
I don't need a microphone. I have a big mouth. It's okay, Trey. It's okay.
Okay.
So, one of the interesting things of this show is this vitrine over here, which contains a lot of the Village Voice first articles about you doing street art and stencils. When Carlo and Howl did our Zeitgeist show this summer, we had a lot of artists vying for first rights. I was the first person in the East Village. Now they were throwing out dates like 77, 78, 82. You had Village Voice writing about you doing street art from 68. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, the street art, the 68, that's the object art. That's a stencil.
Can you explain what that is? That's really interesting.
Yeah. Okay. That has a background to it that gets very like crazy. I was a teenager when I made that. I applied to go to Cooper Union. I got rejected by Cooper Union for being gay. Because like, you had to take a psychological test, and this was in the grade hall at Cooper Union, and they would hold up a piece of like paper, blank paper. They said, "This is our psychological test. You write about anything that means something deep to you, that's important to you. Because at the Cooper Union, we want to bring out who you really are." So me being a teenager, and now teenagers are very idealistic, I said, "I'll write about why I was talking."
Hey guys, we're here.
I'll write about just gayness, but it wasn't called gayness then, it was always called homosexuality. So I got rejected, and then when I went to talk to them, they said, well, we don't mind if you're like that, just don't ever talk about it or let people know you're like that. So I decided that I had to get written about in the Village Voice. And back then there was an art about that was about rejecting art galleries and having art in the street. And it was conceptual art that didn't have an object. So I just made these stenciled words. I said object art. I actually believed it. And an object like as a verb and as a noun, object and object and object, like two objects, and stenciled it on the street. But this is 4th Street between B and C. That was a really like tough block back then. But I stenciled it any place where the stuff around it would have a good compositional sense, so that like people would look at the object art words and think, oh yeah, it's so deep. But it really wasn't so deep. was what was around it was deep. So they were noticing both. Because I was more concerned, first of all, in my old age, I can admit that my primary concern was getting written about in the Village Voice because I was so pissed off at Cooper Union that I wanted an article written about me. Because I said, well, people go to art school so they can be written about in papers like this, so I just want to get that out of the way. So when I stenciled it, I sent a letter to John Perrault, who was writing in the Village Voice, written on graph paper. And then I said to myself, wait a minute, I'm like 18 years old, 19 years old. He has to somehow think I'm like a crazy 40-year-old. He's not going to write about someone who's a teenager. So I deliberately wrote on the paper, I pressed down with a ballpoint pen as hard as I could to make it look like it was by a very crazy person, and that he would assume was much older. And then when the Village Voice came out the next Wednesday, I ran out and got it, and lo and behold, he had written about it. And as happy as you could be, because I was very, very young. So I would ride the subway, and if I saw someone reading the Village Voice, I'd say, oh, they must be reading about me. Oh, that's so nice. So, but that stuff went by very quick in my life. Just because, as people started to like it, I thought, do I want to do this all my life? Do I want to be? And besides, I was making other things all the time at home. I was making little knickknacks and stuff that I was much closer to. So even though this stuff brought me closer to the art world, meaning the object art stencils, it wasn't closer to my heart, actually. So I knew I had to claim some ground that I could build on that was more about just what I was really about. So from then on, it became what it is now. Yes?
So I have a two-part question. The first one, well, they're both going off of what this question is. The first one is that as you participated within the street art scene, the public art scene, and with the idea that you use quote-unquote low art materials within your art, did that resonate within the fluidity and the idea of impermanence with permanent messages that would imprint on people? And the other question is that, with someone who does work with generations of today for some time, and for someone who has viewed so much of street art and the public gallery, what would you say to those who are street artists today of what they're doing well and what they could do better to impact those that view it?
I don't think I can answer that. Each artist is a different person, and so I don't know a particular artist's relationship to life and the street unless I meet them or unless I see their art. So there's really, it's a cliche, but it's true. The person has to be true to themselves, and somehow that's a first step always. But I couldn't grasp basically what the essence of what you're talking about unless I could get closer to what you're talking about. Does that make sense?
That's fair. So then, on more of a broader spectrum,
yes.
What would be inviting to see that you think would be impactful for people, just in general, from the public art sphere?
What would be inviting to,
meaning impacting, purposeful, meaningful, something that would bring forward evolution and the idea of promise for tomorrow.
Again, that depends totally on the individual person, and if I have an interaction with them, I have to do my best to figure out an entry point for them. It really isn't something I can be overly general about, because that would be unfair to each individual as they approach life with their experience and whatever it is, the subtle needs a person has. I can't address that without having some communication with someone. Does that make sense?
That's fine.
Okay.
Maybe we'll take one more question. We'll take both of you.
Okay. I wanted to know, is there a story about choosing those aluminum foil tin plates? Because I was thinking of them that they're like doggy bag, takeaway food. Is this takeaway art Is there a story why you chose that material?
It's not takeaway art. I don't want anyone. I hope no one steals it. No, it's actually. I mean, it's fine if you look at it that way. I mean, I get what you're saying.
I mean, impressions takeaway.
Yes, they're lasagna pans. But they're actually there for like as lasagna pans because you look at them and say they're lasagna pans, but they're there. I hesitate to say this, but they're a formal device. They're actually inspired by Donald Judd. And then they're jammed together to contradict what Donald Judd usually does. And they're also inspired by the Bauhaus because they're like everyday materials, and the Bauhaus was into everyday materials. But again, they're about contradicting what the Bauhaus was about and having it be very kind of knick-knacky, because the Bauhaus never understood like home. It was all about house. These are about home. So like these are about addressing a formal issue and an art historical issue and having that be part of hidden within it, that if someone can find it, it's there, but it's not necessary that that's what's foregrounded in their consciousness. The first thing is the story. But the story, you notice, isn't just presented as a book only. It's presented this way. And that's for a reason. That's because so that the person experiencing it is contained within this space and responds to things as they do, and then maybe goes back to the story. But again, the things like the pans themselves are really inspired by people like Donald Judd. I never tell people that.
I'm glad I
Let's
asked.
go last to the gentleman at the time. Yes, Tom.
Just to go back to Tommy, to the question about the relationship between being gay and Catholicism, what about the fact that the very heart of it is loving another man?
Oh, well, you're talking about like the relationship with Jesus?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that is loving another man. So like it's sublime mysticism. But it, of course, it can be given a homoerotic spin, but in a way that has more than consummate sex, but doesn't have everyday sex. I would think it's more of like a total involvement.
But truly human as well as truly divine. So truly.
Oh yeah. It's like both taken to the max. So like you've been to Rome. So like Saint Teresa and ecstasy. You know, the Bernini piece is a good example of that. I mean, because like the angel there is actually symbolic of Christ and God's penetration of her inner being, which is told as a kind of sexual orgasm, but it's about something greater than sex. But that can get very complicated and crazy. I mean, did that answer something? Okay.
Well, thank you all so much for coming. I really do hope you all have it on. It is an incredible resource. It's got brilliant essays, a wonderful interview with Tommy, and thanks so much to Chris and Ted and the team here for producing it. So, thanks for coming.